any new resource or research projects to this particular aim then, given that's where the interesting questions really are? Should NASA spend time and budget pursuing the much less likely task of finding signs of extraterrestrial life in small objects within or close to the Earth's atmosphere?
So, I mean, most of obviously our instruments are designed to look for the phenomena that we study at NASA. If any of our data are useful, if any of our data are applicable, then we absolutely will be devoting that and turning that over through our liaison to the whole of government approach. We are not at this time intending to design a mission to do this. That is not part of our kind of overarching NASA direction. We are looking at providing some research support. So if somebody wants to write a research proposal, send it in through the regular channels. We will be looking for ways to do that. And we also talked about supporting sort of the citizen science and the broader like repository of data. Dan, do you want to add to that?
NASA's data are free and publicly accessible for the entire world to download. And we pride ourselves on that fact. And it's this. You have to understand the chaff in order to. You have to understand the chaff in order to really understand and pinpoint the potentially interesting ones. Okay, so we are in such a data poor regime at the moment that we need to turn it into a data rich one to do that. And we employ NASA's assets, many other partners' assets as well in that quest.
And if your question suggests, and I do not know that it does, but if it suggests that NASA ought to keep its nose out of this, well, let me tell you, NASA is not a place that's going to hide its head in the sand. Now, is there interest in this phenomenon in other agencies? In my previous life in the Senate, I was privy to talk to the Navy pilots and to see the video of what they encountered off the coast of California in 2004. That was in a classified setting then. But this is now. And you have now seen that video. And you have heard from those former Navy pilots. Is that of a concern to the Department of Defense? Of course it is. And therefore, we're going to continue our search from a scientific point of view. It's going to be if those other agencies continued their search, we're going to be glad to join in with them. But our stuff is going to be open.
Great. I'm going to take one more from the phone before we go back to the floor. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to hope we can stick to sort of one per person and see how many we can get through. So one more from the phone, please.
Our next question comes from Jeff Faust with Space News. Your line is open.
Hi. I know the press release states that NASA is still evaluating the independent study team's report and its recommendations. Does NASA plan to publish a formal response to the report and its recommendations? And if so, what timeline can we expect to see that?
So let me give you a quick preview about how this works. So we have only very, very recently received the report, and what you have seen today in our press release represents our initial actions in recognition of the urgency of this matter. And yes, we will be following up as appropriate with additional actions, suggest the recommendations and act on them in light of budget and many other priorities. but we'll be announcing more in the future.
Great, thank you. Please, back to the room. Identify yourself too, please.
Good morning, Sam Cabral with BBC News Digital. We've been talking a lot about shift from sensationalism to science today. Has NASA been in touch with the Mexican authorities about the rather sensational revelations earlier this week of 2 allegedly non-human corpses? And what, if any, importance do you attach to these discoveries?
I think David had to
Yeah.
prep for that one.
Well, this is something that I know I've only seen on Twitter. So it's, when we have unusual things, you want to make data public. I think of this as like NASA has one of the most valuable samples from outer space, lunar rocks. What do? We make them available to any scientists who want to work on this. We don't know the nature of those samples that were shown in front of them. If I was the Mexican government, I would are making recommendations to the Mexican government. That's not our charge here. We're doing this for NASA. My recommendation was, if you have something strange, make samples available to the world scientific community, and we'll see what's there.
I'll just add that one of the main goals of what we're trying to do here today is to move conjecture and conspiracy towards science and sanity, and you do that with data, as David says. And that's the whole purpose of this study and this roadmap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Brandy Vincent from Defense Scoop. Thank you all for doing this. I actually have 2 lines of questions, if it's okay. First, for Ms. Fox, what's the timeline and immediate actions that NASA is pursuing specifically with ARROW now that the report has been completed? And what mechanisms are NASA and DoD really using to share information and collaborate securely? And do you see more coming? And then separately, for Mr. Spergel, I noticed in the final report a lot of the images and media that were added were from DoD, snapshots that we'd previously seen from DoD data. Not much from FAA, if anything, not from other agencies. Can you speak to why that is and what all you used beyond DoD to inform your report?
Dr. Fox, Dr. Spergel, I'll pass it to you guys.
Sure. So, yes, our immediate actions, I think there was such a lot in those questions. So the immediate actions, we've established our director of UAP research. They're working across the whole of government. They're working very closely with ARROW. They are the sort of central point for all of the collaboration. I'm not sure what else you asked, I'm sorry.
What mechanisms are you using to share data and information with the Defense Department?
All mechanisms available to us. As Dan eloquently said, all of our data are open and public. So actually, I mean, we share everything with everybody, so everybody can access our NASA data.
I mean, do you have like a specific repository or mechanism or channel specifically with DoD where you're sharing information? Can you just expand a little on how ARROW and DoD are working ARROW and NASA are working so deeply to share things?
Sure. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to handle that. Yeah. So as Nikki beautifully said, all of NASA's data is open and accessible to the public. If DoD on a specific instance need to tap our expertise, then there are obviously secure ways of doing that, and we've done that by appointing our liaison officer. And yes, we know how to talk to DoD in a classified space. But again, most of what we do is unclassified, and for good reason.
And the answer is actually straightforward, that ARROW is the lead agency in the government. So FAA reported events go to ARROW. Mm-hmm. So they're the central collection agency, and that actually, if you go to the ARROW site, they have a pretty complete list of things they've analyzed and are trying to make public. Though with ARROW, and this is just something I think is worth repeating in the context of looking at images that come from military satellites and intelligence community, it's important to remember that images taken by military instruments are classified. not because of what's in the image, but because of the nature of the measuring instrument. And I think this is one of the unique things that NASA brings here, is NASA is about openness and transparency. When NASA makes measurements, NASA has across all of it does, this program of making its data open and available. And of course, because it's not making measurements with classified instruments, that enables it to do this. And that one of the things that NASA brings to this space.
Thank you. And just a really quick clarification, because I think it's important. The NASA Aero Liaison, is that official, the same as your new UAP head of research?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, one more in the room before we go back to the phones for a couple.
Thank you. My name is Jacob Jensen. I work for a Danish newspaper called Berlingske. My question is for Mr. Nelson. You said at the beginning of the meeting that that NASA will be transparent. Well, a month and a half ago, Mr. David Grush said under oath in Congress that the U.S. government is in possession of UAPs and extraterrestrial life. How can you be sure at NASA that other parts of the U.S. government is being transparent?
I don't speak for other parts of the government, but I can tell you NASA, which I speak for, is open and transparent with our data.
Do you believe what Mr. David Grush said, or is he lying?
You would want me to give a personal opinion?
Yes, please.
Of what he said. What he said, if I recall having seen this on the nightly news, was that he had a friend that knew where a warehouse was that had an UFO locked up in a warehouse. He also said he had another friend that said that he had parts of an alien. Whatever he said, where's the evidence? Is my response.
Excuse me. He also said that he did interview over 40 employees at the Pentagon.
Long time ago, there was a TV show, Jack Friday, and he used to say, just the facts, just the facts. Show me the evidence.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we will go to the phones. Again, I know people have lots of questions, but I'm going to try to keep us to just to one for each person. And so next person on the phone, go ahead and introduce yourself.
The next question comes from Gina Cesari with ABC News. Your line is open.
This is for Senator Nelson. Your report mentioned that AI could be very useful in helping in this investigation. How do you see that, sir?
Well, why limit us in anything in interpretation of data? And AI is just coming on the scene to be explored in all areas. So why should we limit any technological tool in analyzing data that we have? I said AI was one of the things that we were going to employ.
We use AI or artificial intelligence and machine learning throughout our NASA science portfolio. It is an amazing tool for helping us to actually find often signatures that are sort of buried in data. And so a lot of our data are just sort of wiggly line plots. We get excited about wiggly line plots, by the way, but sometimes you see the wiggles and you miss a signal in there. And by using artificial intelligence, we can often find signatures. So one example we've had is to be able to find signatures of superstorms using very old data that really is before sort of like routine scientific satellite data, and it's amazing. And so just being able to use those techniques often can allow us to find things, to actually find the needle. As David so eloquently said, once you've actually really it also helps us to really characterize the hay. And so you can start subtracting the hay and look for the needles behind.
So let me just take this moment to try to demystify AI and ML.
Thank you.
As scientists, and probably many of you in high school were trained to do this, we have some data, You took your data, you drew a graph, you put a line through it. You had data in 2 dimensions, X and Y. Right now, much of our data is in a much higher dimensional space. And if you're working with something like ChatGPT, it's in a high dimensional space of language, or tokens, if you want to get technical, with 12,000 tokens in the ChatGPT 3.5, for example. And machine learning is a powerful tool for representing functions in high dimensional space. That means we get to work with data in a high dimensional space. AI is very powerful, but it's no more powerful than the data you give it. It's a way of, this is why it's very powerful, say, with NASA's weather and climate data. We've got an incredible amount of data, and it's data that you want to do more with than just put a line on a graph. You want to extract all that information or more information in that high dimensional space, and I think we're just really discovering the power of that tool. And it's one of the tools NASA and not just scientists, but I think a lot of people in a lot of different industries are using to learn new things about high dimensional data. But it always comes back to the data you feed into your analysis, whether it's a line on a graph paper or a high dimensional space explored with machine learning. And if you don't got good data, you're not going to learn things.
I'm going to add one sentence. Sorry. High dimensional does not mean high space dimensions, not interdimensional travel. We're talking about multiple parameters here. Okay. Erin.
Great. We are coming close to time. I want to get 2 more questions, and we're going to do one on the phone and one more in the room. And hopefully, if we keep our questions short and our answers short, we'll get to those 2. For anybody who's here who hasn't had a chance to ask a question, you are more than welcome to send an email, and we will try to get you answers as quickly as possible. So one more on the phone, please.
Yes, our next question comes from Peggy Holliger with Financial Times. Your line is open.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to ask a question. I'm curious about you saying here that you want to rope in crowdsourcing, but also you speak specifically about the potential of using commercial assets as well as your own. I'm curious about, can you just give me a bit more detail how you will do that? Will that be through commercial contracts, or will you ask for voluntary reportings of sightings? And also, I think that's when you talk a lot about the importance of sensor, I'm going to use the word harmonization, because there's no kind of harmonization between the way the sensors work. Presumably, that would be the same for the use of commercial assets. How does that use of commercial assets and crowdsourcing square with the sensor harmonization that you talk about? And who's going to pay for all this? Thank you.
So let me just say a little bit about crowdsourcing. Much of what we have in mind is taking advantage of the fact that there's several billion of these floating around, right? And they take, I'm holding up a cell phone for those on the radio. They take wonderful, high-quality images, have high-quality metadata, record local magnetic field, sound, gravitational field. There's a wealth of data that a cell phone takes, and you can imagine designing apps that make the images relatively tamper-free. You can at least make it hard to do. And I think if we have a collection where interesting events are collected by citizens, hosted, and you have multiple images of the same event, we will be able to learn a lot. And one of the things NASA supports is citizen science. And I think that the idea that if you see something you don't understand, collect data, we aggregate the data and we learn from it, is important in this context, and just, I think, in some ways, an opportunity to engage the broader public in doing science.
Great. Our last question, please, from the floor.
Yep. Thank you all for doing this. Joe Khalil with News Nation. My first question is, you've described harassment of some of the panelists. While that is horrible and never a good thing, it does sort of come with the nature of public officials. Mr. Nelson, as senator, lawmakers get that kind of thing all the time. Is that the justification for keeping this new position, Director of UAP Research, private? Do you plan on doing that forever? Is that a temporary thing? Because it seems to cut against the dedication to being open and transparent if this person forever is not going to be revealed, their identity, who they are.
Yeah, okay, so at the time, yes, we are withholding that name. Let's not forget that we've only just received this report. And what we need to do now as an agency is come together and provide a cohesive and coherent response to it that addresses multiple findings and recommendations, okay? We're only announcing initial actions today. Will that person's name be disclosed, to answer your specific question? Potentially, yes. But again, we need to ensure that the scientific process and method is free, okay? That's my response.
Thank you. And just lastly, the report says that you relied on unclassified material. You've given a very understandable description for why the DoD classifies certain images and videos. Why did you all not have access to classified material, and could you have, done that?
I have. So just understand that. Let the committee speak for themselves.
So one of the reasons that we restricted ourselves, this study, to unclassified data is because we can speak openly about it. And in so doing, we're aiming, again, to alter the discourse from sensationalism to science, as Administrator Nelson beautifully said. NASA personnel, as appropriate, know how to talk to DoD on a classified basis, but the purpose of this study was to tell us what open data we could use in combination with the power of science to move our understanding forward. Okay? That was the purpose, and we're speaking about it openly today.
And so one of the challenges
And I'm afraid we do have to wrap up. We are at time. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Again, for those people who were not able to get questions, I do apologize for not doing it in the room. However, please send an email based on our press release. You will have information to access, and we will try to get you the answers we can. And with that, we're concluding today's press briefing, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
It's a new era of pioneers, star sailors, thinkers, and adventurers.